Right. So today we're going to do a deep dive into acne and try to understand it beyond just the basics.
Yeah.
And we've got a great source for this. It's a BBC video, right?
Right.
Featuring a dermatologist, Dr. Sharon Critchlow.
And she's had her own struggles with acne,
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to hear from someone who's been there.
definitely. And what I find fascinating is how the BBC piece goes beyond just like the scientific side of acne.
Yeah.
It really delves into the social and personal impact, too, like how it makes people feel.
Yeah. And right away, they hit us with this statistic. 95% of people between 11 and 30 experience some degree of acne. That's
No, almost everyone, basically.
yeah, I mean, it's a huge number. Is that
Makes you wonder how accurate it is globally, right?
right? Yeah. Are there places where it's less common?
Hmm.
Or maybe even more?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how those figures vary in different parts of the world.
Right.
I mean, it's got to be influenced by genetics, diet, even environmental factors, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like you said, it's more than just the science. And the BBC piece also points out that acne isn't just a teenage thing.
Oh, definitely not.
It can stick around.
Into adulthood.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They even say it's particularly common for women to experience adult acne.
Even into their 30s and 40s.
Yeah, even then.
Yeah.
Hormonal fluctuations related to menstruation and menopause, I think, play a big part.
Okay, that makes sense. And they really dive into the emotional side of acne in this video,
Oh, yeah.
especially for teenagers. Dr. Critchlow really emphasizes how it can impact their self-esteem, like how they feel about themselves and
Right.
friendships,
Right.
even how they interact with other people.
Yeah, and that's a crucial point. I mean, teenagers are already dealing with so many changes.
Yeah.
So many insecurities. Acne just piles on top of that. It makes those years even harder.
Definitely. And I think that's what she's trying to say in the video. Don't just brush those feelings aside.
It's real, and it matters.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, we can't really talk about acne without talking about hormones. The BBC video talks about how that surge in hormones during puberty, especially testosterone,
That's the big one.
is directly linked to acne. It's almost like a recipe for it.
Well, yeah, and it's not just that testosterone is increasing. It's how it messes with your skin.
What do you mean?
Well, testosterone can actually increase sebum production. That's the oily stuff our skin naturally makes.
Right.
And if you have too much of it, it can clog your pores and bam, breakout city.
Okay, so the hormones are kind of like the fuel for acne, and the sebum is what clogs things up.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, and I gotta say, this is where the BBC piece really got interesting for me.
Okay, what part?
Dr. Critchlow opens up about her own struggles with acne growing up. She even talks about how her family couldn't afford to send her to a dermatologist.
Oh, wow.
So she had to figure things out on her own, just using those over-the-counter treatments.
I mean, that's pretty powerful. It just shows that even medical professionals have dealt with this.
Yeah, and I think it makes her message more relatable.
Definitely. It's like she gets it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And it highlights the whole issue of healthcare accessibility, which is something we don't always talk about.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Not everyone can just go see a specialist whenever they need to.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And even if you can, finding the right treatment can be a journey in itself.
You're telling me.
So many options out there. Like, where do you even start? Creams, pills, light therapy, even changing what you eat. It's a lot.
You're so right. And the BBC piece didn't get too deep into treatments, but it definitely seemed like Dr. Critchlow's experience fueled her passion for helping others with acne.
Totally. It's like she took all that frustration.
And turned it into a mission.
Yeah, a mission to make sure her patients don't have to go through the same thing.
Exactly. And they even use a pretty strong phrase to describe how she felt about her acne in the video. They call it the bane of my life.
Wow. I mean, that really captures how deeply it can affect someone. Like, it's more than just a few pimples.
Right.
It can really mess with your confidence.
Yeah.
Like, it's this burden you carry around.
And they use some interesting language to describe the emotional impact, too. They talk about being emotionally vulnerable and how we shouldn't trivialize it.
It seems like they're really trying to get people to understand that acne is a big deal. Like, it can have a real impact on mental health.
And we shouldn't just dismiss it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just skin deep.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the emotional side of things, but let's dive a bit deeper into the science here. We touched on hormones, but are there other factors that contribute to acne?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Genetics play a role.
Yeah.
You know, if your parents had acne, you're more likely to get it too.
Okay, so it can be hereditary.
Uh-huh. And there's this whole area of research about the gut-skin connection.
The what?
The gut-skin connection. Basically, it's the idea that the bacteria in our gut can actually affect the health of our skin.
Whoa, really? So like what we eat can show up on our face?
Exactly. It's pretty amazing. And then, of course, there are external factors, too.
Like what?
Pollution, for
Oh,
example,
right, yeah.
or even certain skincare products. Some of them can actually clog your pores and trigger breakouts.
Hmm.
It's crazy.
So it's kind of this mix of internal and external factors that all play a role.
It's a complex system, that's for sure.
And it's interesting how the video frames puberty and all the hormonal changes that come with it, almost like it's this rite of passage.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
And acne is just part of that experience for a lot of people.
It's like they're trying to normalize it, especially for teenagers. Like, hey, this is normal. It happens to a lot of us.
It's part of growing up.
Yeah. And I think that can be really reassuring for teenagers to hear.
I think so too. But even though acne often gets better with age, it's important to remember that it can stick around for some people.
Definitely. And that's why it's crucial to remember that seeking help is an option at any age.
Yeah, you don't have to just live with it.
Exactly.
Mm.
There are treatments out there.
And it's not a one-size-fits-all thing, right?
Nope. It's about finding what works for you. Your skin type, how bad your acne is, any other health conditions you have. It all factors in.
Okay, so it's really about personalized treatment.
Absolutely. And it's an ongoing process, too. What works for you now might not work a year from now.
So you got to stay informed.
Yeah, keep up with the latest research and all that.
Wow. Acne is a lot more complicated than I think people realize.
Right. It's a whole world in itself.
So out of all the stuff we've covered so far, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners today?
I think it's the combination of Dr. Critchlow's story and that deep dive into the psychological impact of acne. It just reminds us that there's a human being behind every case of acne.
Right.
And that person deserves understanding and support.
I completely agree. And it's not just about feeling empathy. It's about taking action,
I mean,
like seeking help, advocating for better access to treatment, creating a more understanding environment.
oh, for sure. We all have a role to play.
And remember, knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
The more we understand about acne, the better equipped we are to support ourselves and others.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And it's not just about getting to see a dermatologist, Even if you can't see one, finding the right treatment. It's a real journey.
Oh, for sure.
So many options out there.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
It really is. Creams, pills, even light therapy. And then there's the whole diet thing. It's like, where do you even begin?
Right, yeah. The BBC piece didn't go too deep into treatments, but it really seemed like Dr. Critchlow's experience kind of fueled her passion to help other people with acne.
It's like she took all that frustration from her own experience and turned it into this driving force, Like, I'm going to make sure my patients don't have to go through what I did.
I love that. And they actually use a pretty powerful phrase in the video to describe how she felt about her acne.
What's that?
They call it the bane of my life.
Wow. That's heavy. It really captures how deeply acne can affect someone, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about a few pimples here and there. It's this weight on your shoulders, this thing that can really mess with your confidence.
And they use some interesting language to talk about the emotional impact too, like emotionally vulnerable and trivialize. It's like they're really trying to drive home the point that...
But it's more than just a skin issue, right?
Exactly.
It's a mental health thing, too. We shouldn't just dismiss it.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the emotional side of things, but let's get back into the science for a bit.
Okay.
We touched on hormones, but what other factors contribute to acne? Like, what else is going on there?
Well, genetics definitely play a role.
Okay, so like if your parents had acne.
Exactly. You're more likely to have it, too.
Makes sense.
And then there's all this new research on the gut-skin connection, which is fascinating.
What's that?
So basically, it's this idea that the bacteria in our gut can actually influence how healthy our skin is.
Whoa. So you're saying like what we eat can show up on our face.
Exactly. Isn't that wild?
That's crazy. So it's not just what we put on our skin, it's what we put in our bodies too.
Right. And then, of course, there are external factors as well.
Like what?
Well, pollution, for one.
Oh, right, yeah.
And even certain skincare products.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some of them can actually clog your pores and make things worse.
Wow. It's complicated.
It really is. It's like this whole interplay of internal and external factors.
It's like a recipe for disaster.
Pretty much. And, it's interesting how the BBC video talks about puberty and hormonal changes. It's almost like they're framing it as this rite of passage.
Yeah.
Like it's just a normal part of growing up.
And acne is just something that comes along with it for a lot of people.
Right. I think that's a good message for teenagers,
Yeah.
Like, hey, you're not alone in this.
Totally. But even though acne often improves as you get older, for some people it can stick around.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that's why it's so important to remember that seeking help is always an option, no matter how old you are.
Exactly. You don't have to just suffer in silence.
There are treatments out there that can help.
And it's not a one-size-fits-all thing either. It's about finding what works for you individually, your skin type, how severe your acne is, if you have any other health conditions. It all matters.
So it's all about personalized treatment.
Absolutely. And it's an ongoing process. What works today might not work a year from now.
That's true for a lot of things.
It is. So you got to stay informed, keep learning about the latest research and developments.
Yeah, it's like a constant evolution.
You could say that. Acne is a lot more complex than I think people realize.
It really is.
There's a whole world to discover.
So out of everything we've talked about today, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think it's the combination of Dr. Critchlow's personal story and how deeply acne can impact someone psychologically. It just highlights that there's a human being behind every case of acne, and that person deserves our understanding and support.
Totally. And it's not just about feeling empathy, it's about actually doing something, right? Like seeking help if you need it, advocating for better access to treatment, creating a more understanding environment for people who are dealing with acne.
Yeah, absolutely. We can all play a part in that.
And remember, knowledge is power.
It really is.
The more we understand about acne, the better equipped we are to support ourselves and each other.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It's interesting that the BBC piece chose to focus on a dermatologist who has had acne herself.
Yeah, it kind of flips the script, right? You don't usually see that.
Definitely. It makes you think about how our own experiences shape how we see things.
You're right. Like, even doctors, they're not immune to the stuff they treat.
Right. It humanizes them a bit.
And it probably makes them better doctors,
Yeah.
having that shared experience.
For sure. Especially when it comes to something like acne. It's so personal.
Exactly. Can make patients feel more comfortable, more understood.
Okay, so after all this, what's the big takeaway from our deep dive into acne? What do we want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the biggest thing is that acne is way more than just skin deep.
Yeah.
It's hormones, it's genetics, it's even what's going on in our gut.
And we can't forget about the emotional and social impact, right?
Absolutely. It affects people on so many levels.
And there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Nope. Everyone's experience is different.
But the important thing is that there's help out there. Nobody should have to deal with this alone.
Exactly. There are dermatologists, therapists, support groups, even online communities. There's a whole network of support out there.
It's about finding what works for you.
Exactly.
Wow, this has been a really eye-opening deep dive into acne. We went way beyond the surface.
Yeah, we did.
We looked at the science, the personal stories, the impact.
This is just the beginning, really. There's always more to learn.
New research coming out all the time.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and don't be afraid to speak up for yourself and for a better understanding of acne.
I love that. And here's a final thought for everyone listening. If acne is so common and affects people so deeply, why is it still such a taboo subject? Why all the shame and stigma? It's something to think about.